Hello, everybody. Are you ready for spring? Well, one thing for certain this year is that spring is most definitely going to roll itself in a very dynamic fashion. Quite a month of astrology we have in store for us in March. Let's touch on some of the key points, and then we'll go back and we'll touch on them more in detail. But this month, we've got the last, and I know for a lot of you, you're breathing a huge sigh of relief after I say this, but the last exactitude in a series of tense aspects between Pluto and Uranus that have been going on for several years. And well, we're finally going to see the backside of these aspects for at least another good, 58 to 60 years. I think the next time they begin to apply is roughly around 2073. So we're in for a break for quite a long time. So grateful for the movement. But you know what? Let's not give it such a bad reputation, because it's bringing in quite a lot of very powerful changes. I'm sure we can see all of them globally. And yes, sure, that's tense and very intense. And it's probably the same on the personal level too. But if you work in harmony with the forces that are there, rather than trying to work against the forces that are there, then what tends to happen, as always happens with every type of Pluto aspect, is you become empowered. So this month, we've got the last exactitude, as I mentioned, between Pluto and Uranus. And early on in the month, we've got Venus crossing the plane of that aspect. That means that Venus is going to conjunct Uranus, and it's also going to square Pluto, so it crosses the plane of that aspect. And then about mid-month, before Pluto and Uranus become exact in their aspect, Mars does the same. So, we've got the healing, because Venus always deals with refinement. It can deal with the healing. So a healing of the tension, and understanding, an integration, and then a powerful moving forward. Coinciding with this Venus crossing of the plane between Pluto and Uranus, we've also got a harmonious aspect that's applying between Jupiter and Uranus. That's very good, and that all happens about 2 or 3 days prior to a full moon. So the full moon energy is very much going to be in place when that aspect is applying, giving it a little bit of extra oomph, okay? And then, as I mentioned, about mid-month, you've got Mars crossing the plane of that alignment between Pluto and Uranus, and Mars will also form a harmonious aspect with Jupiter. Very, very powerful astrology in store for the month, and we're going to talk about each of these aspects in detail. I'll take you on a tour of the astrological chart, pointing out the key points in association at the beginning of the month. On the very first of the month, before we have Venus crossing the Pluto-Uranus plane of aspect, we also have a harmonious aspect that's going to be being formed between Mercury over here in Aquarius and the nakshatra of Dhanishta. Mercury is going to be forming a harmonious aspect with Uranus in Revati, and also opposing Jupiter over here in Ashadha. Now let's focus first on Mercury in Dhanishta. Dhanishta deals with being true to oneself, allowing the purity of one's being to simply flow through one. That is the nature of true prosperity. Why do we get so blocked in our life? Well, it's because most of the time of our life, we spend our time trying to be person A, person B, or person C, when really we can only just be ourselves. And there's a realization that comes in association with this. And even though we may have been cursing the last several months when we've been in a state of limbo, and that's due to Uranus's period of time in Revati, because Revati marks the end of one cycle of being and the beginning of a new cycle. But a necessary personal revolution internally and also externally has been going on that's been setting the stage for a profound shift. one that's more in alignment with who you are, one that's more liberating. Tied in with this because of Jupiter over here in Ashadha and in the sign of Leo, there's a discovery of potential, the discovery of a deeper level of one's truth, realigning with oneself, understanding oneself, making the decision that one is going to live in alignment with what feels natural, right, and appropriate to you. So why didn't we do this before? Well, it's because we needed the time. We had to have the period of time of reflection to sort out and understand really where things had gone wrong. And in order to make the changes that would be more in alignment with our true nature, we had to understand more deeply what our true nature in essence was. That's not always a simple thing. Sometimes we're not able to really tune into ourselves or understand ourselves to the extent that we might like to. And that's why we experience periods of stress, strife, opposition, going through hard times. Well, it's because we're out of alignment. And just as when we get sick, when we have a cold or something, we need the cold to help us to understand that something is wrong so that we can heal. Well, it's the same with getting out of alignment with ourselves. We have challenges so that we can come into alignment. Now, about the 4th, Venus, as I mentioned before, is once again going to cross the plane of this Pluto-Uranus aspect, focusing and honing in here on Venus. Now, it's interesting because we've got 4 planets in Aries right now. Mars is in Aries. Mars in Aries happens once every couple of years, and that's very powerful astrology. It adds a huge degree of cosmic oomph behind any changes that are coming into being. It's like that old, what's that old Led Zeppelin song, and it's got the line in it, if there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. Well, it's sure, maybe it's good to be alarmed. Because being alarmed is what's going to actually create the changes. But Mars is that bustle in the hedgerow. And Mars later on in the month, as we mentioned, is going to conjunct Uranus and square Pluto. And what bigger of a bustle in the hedgerow could you ask for, right? Well, what's going to happen first, though, is we've got Venus crossing that plane. Venus crossing that plane is going to help us to take a look at all that has come before, all the difficulty, all the challenges, all the pain that's been there, all the areas of our life where we might have been living a life of servitude to an entity who wasn't ourselves. I know that sounds like some form of alien invasion, but that's not really what I mean. But hey, maybe it is like that, because sometimes we kind of get out of sorts with ourselves. And it is almost like we're possessed, and we're possessed by our ego. We're possessed by the rational mind that thinks that it needs to do something different than what it really needs to do in its heart. And that's the understanding that we come to. That's what the Mercury alignment in conjunction with this Venus alignment helps us to understand where we've gone wrong in the past, what we can do to make the adjustments for the future that are more in alignment with who we are. Now, something that's very worthy of noting in association with all of the astrology that's happening in March is we're dealing with processes that are mercurial and Venusian by nature. Now, I'm going to expand upon that. When we're dealing with something mercurial, we're dealing with mental processes. We're dealing with an adjustment of the mind. We're dealing with an understanding of how our intellect could have gotten out of balance with our propensity to use proper judgment. I'm going to expand upon that concept a little bit further. Our mind is given us to serve spirit, to serve our soul. But sometimes our mind begins to think that it runs the show, and it takes control of the situation and creates all sorts of havoc and crisis and problems in our life, right? So when the mind is serving soul, then it's balanced. When the intellect is running the show, unless it's serving the soul, then we're dealing with ego processes. So a mercurial process is going to help us to understand more properly when it's functioning in a harmonious manner. It's going to help us to understand more properly the concept of right judgment. Venusian processes. We're dealing with healing. We're dealing with refinement. We're dealing with going back over the past, making the adjustments, making the changes, recognizing where choices were made that might not have been the best choices, not giving ourselves a hard time over it, but making the adjustment that's necessary. Now, so let's take a look at this a little bit further. Venus and Uranus are both in a section of the sky that's called Revati, and Revati is ruled by Mercury. Pluto, on the other hand, is in Purva Ashadha. Purva Ashadha is ruled by Venus. Over here, you've got Jupiter in Ashadha. That's also ruled by Mercury. So very powerful mercurial and Venusian energy that's at play within this, right? So Venus, first crossing the plane of the Pluto-Uranus aspect, after having gone over the south node, having reflected over the past, being in this in-between state, taking a look at things, healing where things may have gotten out of alignment, realigning with our true nature, as in Pluto in Purva Ashadha. Purva Ashadha relates to what I like to call the causal nature of the soul in its pure state that just attracts to itself the very things that it needs in order to connect the mind to the soul and to create harmony within the individual. Now, Pluto is going to do that in a very no-holds-barred manner, right? So where things have been rough, where you've been under pressure, where you just feel like everything is going to crumble, well, you're kind of facing a choice. You can either be true to yourself or you can be true to your desires. And if you're going to be true to your desires, you may find that you're not going to be quite so true to yourself. And instead, your life's just going to get out of alignment. Well, it turns out that you can find a compromise if you make your desires to align with your soul, if you make your desires to have the freedom of self, the true liberation that comes from connecting with who you are and choosing to live in alignment with your ideals, live in alignment with your beliefs, with the concept of allowing for change, growth, and fluctuation, then that's ultimately going to serve you in moving forward from this moment onwards. And that's how this Venus crossing the plane of Pluto and Uranus is going to serve you. There's a recognition that, well, you know, in the past, I wasn't really being true to myself. Now I'm going to do that. I'm going to live my life because this is my life. And I have this time to grow and to change and to evolve. And as Venus does that, Venus is going to form a harmonious angle with Jupiter over here in Ashleisha. Ashleisha on many levels can relate to the discovery of potential through perhaps first having to go through a difficult process that takes you to that space. But hey, you know, it's all part of the journey. But a big shift happens towards the first of the month. And then following upon that, during the whole buildup in this process that's going on, this is all taking place as the moon is growing close to becoming full. The moon this month on the 5th will become full in Purva Palguni. Purva Palguni and Uttara Palguni, both sections of the sky in the tropical sign of Virgo, are very much relationship-oriented nakshatras, or lunar mansions as we sometimes call them. Purva Palguni relates to the setting up of the relationship. Now, this can be taking place in an external relationship for you, but what's much more important is cooperation with yourself. Rather than hiding from yourself, embracing yourself, accepting yourself. That's adding a very strong background tone to these aspects that are going on. And it shows maybe where you've been having a hard time with another, now there's the potential for peace, there's the potential for harmony, and a way forward to be set forth. But that's going to come by making an agreement with yourself. It always starts with the self, and then the ripple moves outwards. And if it starts outside of yourself, well, hey, that's because you've already kind of made that connection inside as well too. So that's what this full moon in Purva Palguni is going to do in association with all these aspects that are happening at the beginning of the month. We're going to shift now to the middle of the month, and we're going to take a look at the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, starting the week of the 10th, on the 10th, Mars is first going to form a harmonious alignment with Jupiter, creating the movement. Mars, of course, is the planet of impulse. It's the planet of passion. And you couldn't ask for a better blessing for these changes than having Mars in Aries, where Mars is exceptionally strong. He really gets the job done in Aries. So big change, big shift. And when you have Mars and Pluto interacting with each other, well, you can have some tension, certainly, but you've also got a very large degree of passion. The important thing is use this energy constructively, not destructively. Now, as I'm saying that, sure, there's the recognition that sometimes the old has to be destroyed so that the new can be rolled in. But it can happen in a manner where there's not necessarily the need for explosion. What I'm talking about here is as passions build, it's important to channel any anger or frustration that might be there into a positive direction. All of our emotions are there to serve us. They're there to create change. Anger, frustration, they need motivation. And the motivation is in creating changes in one's life that keeps that frustration and that anger from being there. Now, as Mars moves through Revati and begins to conjunct Uranus, it's really going to turn things over. There's really going to be a very powerful shift that happens in alignment with the true potential that is within you, in alignment with your true self, as in Pluto in Purva Ashadha. You may find yourself first in a bit of a struggle because we are dealing with the Mars-Pluto square. But the thing is about squares is they're tense, but they bring opportunity after they are over with. So it's like an application of tension and then a big release, right? And of course, it's following on the heels of Venus having gone over this. So as long as we use the wisdom that we have learned at the beginning of the month wisely, then we can make progress towards a constructive direction rather than a destructive direction that's just going to create more hardship in our life, right? The idea here is to make wise decisions, not hasty decisions. Venus will be transiting Ashwini at that time, which is also in the tropical sign of Aries. And Ashwini is represented by the divine physicians. So there's a very strong potential for healing in alignment with this aspect as well. But Ashwini energy can also have the propensity to get a little bit hasty. So there's the need for caution. There's the need to take actions that are in alignment with one's dharma. Now, as this takes place, Saturn is going to begin to form its station before it returns to retrograde motion, which takes place on the 14th of this month. Saturn is in Anuradha. Anuradha is actually ruled by Saturn. Anuradha itself is very passionate energy, but the lesson that Anuradha wants to teach us is boundaries, that we take care of ourselves in equal proportion that we take care of others. Sometimes we find ourselves in our lives giving either too much over to a cause, too much over to a person, and then we experience burnout. Or we experience anger at the very thing that we're devoting our energy to. And why would we be devoting our energy to that thing if we didn't care about it, right? So if you really want to help something or if you really want to help someone, you have to have good boundaries in place. If you don't have good boundaries in place, then you're just going to find yourself experiencing a very high level of burnout. And that's something that we definitely don't want, right? So then finally on the 17th, Uranus and Pluto in their last exactitude. Very powerful changes on the horizon for you. A new chapter of your life is starting, following on the heels of an old chapter, which may have had its tensions, may have had its struggles, but you're going to look back on this whole process several years later and you're going to recognize, wow, that was a time in my life where I really made a very big shift towards setting myself free, and I lived in alignment with who I am rather than in alignment with who I think I should be, right? And that's the difference. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then on the 20th, we've got a solar eclipse, and a solar eclipse that's happening in Pisces and in the nakshatra of Uttara Bhadrapada. Let's talk a little bit about Uttara Bhadrapada. The symbolism of Uttara Bhadrapada, well, it's associated with an entity, a serpent that's called the serpent of the underbelly of the atmosphere. The idea or the concept here that's represented by this particular nakshatra or lunar mansion is the mysterious, the unknown. We have a concept in our mind of what we think we know, or the way that we think that things are, or the way that we think that things even should be. But there is an absolute which is far beyond this. Far beyond this concept that we have, far beyond our beliefs even. And even at some point in time, it becomes necessary for us to relinquish our beliefs and to relinquish our ideals if we're going to grow. Now, basically, this particular solar eclipse is all about letting go in general. It's taking place in Pisces, the last sign. It's taking place in Uttara Bhadrapada, which says there's something that we think that we know, but a missing piece of the puzzle comes into place and helps us to make a very big change in our lives, which involves a very large degree of surrender on our part. In recognizing that while we may feel that we know certain things, there's quite a lot that we don't know. And quite often we can benefit by that that we don't know. We can benefit we can benefit more greatly from those things that we don't know than those things that we think that we know. Right? If a glass is filled with water, right, you can't put any more into it. The same thing with the mind. If the mind is filled with its concepts, ideas of the way that things should be, well, then you can't bring any more wisdom or knowledge into it. So this particular solar eclipse is about surrender. It's about letting go of the past. It's about forgiving the past. It's about welcoming in the new and all that the new may bring, being open to what it may bring, being accepting of what it may bring, trying not to be afraid of what it may bring. Anytime we're dealing with Pluto, there's always going to be a certain level of fear. But one important thing to remember about fear is that fear is quite often just that, fear. Quite often it doesn't have anything to do with an actual reality. Now, Pluto, as it forms tense aspects, especially with Uranus, and this tense aspect with Uranus will still be in place at the time of the solar eclipse, Pluto is going to make the fears that it brings seem very real. They're going to be very tangible, right? But what good is fear going to do? Right? All emotions serve us. Fear can motivate us to change too, right? But if we succumb to the fear, we're going to get paralyzed. We're not going to take action, and we're also not going to see clearly. So you can surrender the ideas that you have that are associated with your fears, the things that you think you know are going to happen, and welcome in the fact that you may have no earthly idea of the benefits and the wonderful blessings that are getting ready to roll your way. So neither give in to fear, but also neither bolster the ego to the extent that goes, things are going really good now and things are just going to continue to roll wondrously in my life. Well, because then if something bad happens, well, then we kind of take a fall, right? Which isn't to say that something bad is going to happen, which isn't to say you don't enjoy the moment and all that it brings, but you live each moment with awareness and with receptivity and with always the willingness to learn a little bit more. And that's what March offers, is an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to be yourself, truly in alignment with yourself, but also allow yourself to grow. That's the opportunity that's on offer to you with March. I'd like to help you with these changes if you're interested. I do offer a vast range of astrological services that are available through my website, and you'll see within this video a link that you can click on that will take you to my astrological services page. Also, further down on the page in the description area, there's also a link to the astrological services page. I offer person-to-person consultations, recorded video reports, and also written reports. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube page yet, please consider doing so. There will be a new moon video that is posted for the solar eclipse that happens towards the end of the month on the 20th, which we've just been discussing, but also for the full moon that happens at the beginning of the month. That's going to do it for this look at the astrology of March. Until next time we talk, please do take the very best care of yourself.